Schools in England have been told there is no general duty to allow children to change their gender identity.
Yeah, and it's part of a long-awaited guidance for schools and colleges for pupils who question their gender.
So the Minister for Women and Equalities, Kemi Badenoch, was asked if children in single-sex schools would have to change school if they wanted to change their sex. Here's what she had to say.
Transitioning does not and cannot change your sex. So irrespective of social transitioning, which we have said is not a neutral act and should only be happening in the rarest of circumstances, you should be in a single-sex school going to the school that applies to your biological sex.
Well, there you go. That's Kemi Badenoch. Well, saying it as it is, really. You can't change your sex, so you will have to go to a single-sex school, even if you are gender dysphoric.
Yeah, maths teacher Bobby Seagull now joins us to discuss this. Bobby, lovely to see you. Thank you for joining us. Former Prime Minister Liz Truss said earlier today that the guidance doesn't go far enough, and because it is exactly that, guidance, do we need a change in the law, as some quarters are calling for?
And again, I'll say my perspective as a teacher. So I've been in a classroom now in secondary schools for 10 years. When I first started as a teacher, this wasn't an issue, no teacher had heard about it. It wasn't in training. It's in the last few years that we've seen the issue of transgender in schools becoming more prevalent. So obviously it's something that we need to be aware of as teachers and people in wider society. So what I understand is that they haven't gone to the blanket ban and saying no social transitioning. But they have said that schools are allowed to use their discretion in certain cases. And again, I think it's, my understanding is if a child discloses to their school they want to transition gender, I think now under guidance they should be telling parents. But again, the exception is from a school's perspective, we always think about safeguarding. So as a teacher, we are in loco parentis. So we sort of take on the role of the parent in school. So as a duty of that, generally, you should be telling parents their issues with the child, their academic work, their mental health, wanting to change gender. But we can make exceptions currently under the guidance if we think there's a safeguarding issue, if we think that mum or dad might harm the child, if we reveal that the child is thinking about changing gender. So I think in that sense, it at least gives schools some leeway rather than being a blanket, you must do this policy.
Yeah, Bobby, I want to get into the particulars of this guidance a little with you, but you mentioned that this wasn't an issue a few years ago or when you came into the profession. Why do you think, speaking to children every day, why do you think it's become so prevalent, or at least increased in prevalence quite rapidly? Would you say there's an element of social contagion going on?
So it's a really challenging question, Emily. So I would say is that times do change. And again, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, I would never talk about my mental health. I'd be like, I'm always bouncy, always happy. But over lockdown, things changed. People talked about their well-being and how they feel. And again, you start finding workplaces, different environments, people are more used to talking about how they feel, how they think. Again, we've got in Britain this stiff upper lip. We just sort of take things on the chin. So as society changes and become more open, this is again an issue. Maybe, again, I don't know the research, but maybe people had sort of gender dysphoric issues before, but maybe they never felt comfortable discussing it. So I think society in general, people are more open about discussing things. So I guess maybe that just reflects that trend.
Bobby, have you had any children in your class or school who has come to you or your colleagues, your fellow teachers, saying that they want to change gender or they want to identify as something else? And how have you dealt with that, if so?
Yeah, so we have had a couple of students in our school wanting to be identified as non-binary. And I think it's a case of trying to make sure that you have conversations with the child, try to inform the parents if you think it's reasonable, and also to make sure that the rest of the school community, because again, it's not just the child that's being impacted, it's their peers, maybe certain teachers may have different perspectives, the wider sort of community of the school. So it's one thing where it's a lot of people that you've got to really consider. And I always say, from my perspective as a teacher, is even though it's challenging, even though it's a moral minefield, it's making sure that you approach things from a place of compassion, because adolescence is a troubling period as it is. And again, with social media, there's influences. It's a really tough period. So as a teacher, we shouldn't just go, no, shut the argument down. Have a conversation. Again, I think they're the best teachers, the ones that can encourage a dialogue with people.
What do you think that teachers across the board will bear this guidance on board, take this guidance on board, because there has been a head teacher in Liverpool who's come out and said it's taken so long for this guidance to be published. There's been lots of politics going on behind the scenes. I've had my own guidance for the last, decade or so. Why should I change it? We're fine as we are.
Yeah, and again, that's the problem with guidance. I know in the last few years, I think the Association of School Council Leaders, they came up with their own guidance, and many schools have adopted that as a sort of de facto policy. So until a government decides we're going to set this as in law and statute, schools are free to do what they want. And again, if you're a governor of a school, you will generally defer to government guidance. And again, I think most schools will probably follow this policy, but because it's guidance, it still leaves, maybe some would say, the burden on schools to decide. And again, that's where some schools find it problematic, because if the burden's on the school community to decide exactly what to do, then it puts undue pressure on them, and they can face pressure from external bodies, social media. So the government, it's a really...
That's a bit difficult, though, isn't it, for parents, though, Bobby, because this guidance is supposed to put parents first, i.e. they're supposed to be told if their child wants to socially transition in school. If you then had a school completely disregarding that and treating a biological girl as if they were a boy in school and not telling the parents, you get into quite difficult water, tricky water, don't you, there?
It's really challenging, because I would say the safeguarding issues where it needs to come down to, because when Ofsted come in, they obviously look for academic and the sort of social environment of the school, but they can fail schools on safeguarding if you fail in that regard. So in this particular case, schools need to decide, again, they're the best assessor of their safeguarding in their community, if they think, on balance, they probably should be discussing and telling parents, because we would tell parents about child's, if a minority student is failing in maths, I'll tell the parents, or if they're getting bullied, the same thing. So in the same thing, if someone's looking to change gender, it should be the parents being involved. But schools have that overarching responsibility. They think it will be a safeguarding issue. And that's where the discretion comes in, which is why I think the government have decided not to have a blanket policy saying you must tell the parent, because there'll be certain households out there that if a child reveals that they're considering changing their gender, they would face harm at home.
Bobby, there is concern and an argument about exactly how many of these children who are identifying as trans or non-binary, how many of them actually have genuine cases of body dysmorphia. I mean, for example, The Telegraph a couple of months ago ran a story about how there was a massive increase, quite laughably to be honest, in children identifying as cats. I mean, have you seen that or heard of that? And what percent of these trans and binary cases are just kids having a bit of fun because they know they can take the mick?
So again, I think with any system, there'll always be a small minority that are looking to abuse it or take it for a ride. And that's always going to be the case, and whether you're looking at sport, media, business, politics. But I think from my experience, my lived experience as a teacher, the ones that do come out and say they are, they think they might be trans, they might want to change gender, you do have to treat them with respect. And obviously the ones that are joking around, you have to, have stern words to them, because it causes difficulty for everyone else. So again, as a teacher, I always say, listen to the child first, understand. I know, again, as a teacher, sometimes a child hasn't done their homework. And I know which students are the ones that are genuinely making things up, or the ones that are like, this child never does work.
Yeah,
again,
but Bobby, I take your point, but because it's so controversial and it's become so political, I do worry that teachers will feel under a huge amount of pressure to take anything the child says with regards to gender totally seriously and as gospel, because they could, face repercussions because of it. But thank you very much indeed for your time, Bobby Seagull, maths teacher. Thank you very much. Always nice to speak to you.
Good
Difficult
stuff.
one for teachers.
It's tough, like you said, if kids know they're untouchable and teachers can't confront them about their silly antics if they are identifying as cats or whatever else. I mean, where does it end? But I mean, there is going to be a genuine.
I think that power dynamic between the pupil and the teacher might have shifted a little too much in the direction of the pupil. But let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com.